it's interesting because I think part of it might be because I am this secure person who believes in forming a trusting relationship and having needs met and having your child feel like, okay, my parent is there as this stable source of me to be able to explore, but then always come back and know that they're there for me. I think I very much value that. And so,
Welcome back to another episode of the Parenting Potential Podcast. My name is Charles,
and I'm Monet.
and this is part two from the Attachment Style Challenge.
Yes.
So, last time we spoke, for those of you who have not heard part one,
Go and listen to part one first because this episode will make a lot more sense and also kind of flow from the conversation we previously had.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So I guess this starting this off, we really wanted to focus on really how our attachment styles have affected our parenting styles, our parenting. So, this one, again, we are not experts, we are not psychologists, we don't have PhDs in this. We are just experts on our own experiences, and this is a conversation, right? So, um, last time did we even mention? I think we did mention we thought our attachment styles are or were.
I don't think so, to be honest.
Yeah, I think we said what our daughters are, what Anaya and Leilani their attachment style is,
Yeah,
which was secure. At least we believed it was secure.
yeah.
Um, but could we just give the audience or the listeners a real quick recap of the four attachment styles, just so they kind of know?
Yeah, and so at first you can kind of look at the attachment styles in two different categories. The one type is the secure attachment,
Hmm.
where this is all based on a study where a caregiver was separated from her baby, and the researchers were able to see the child's response to the caregiver or the mom leaving them, and then how the child acted when the mom came back. And it was supposed to signify what kind of attachment style the baby had, based on their responses in those situations. And so the securely attached babies would, of course, still be a little frustrated or sad or
Hmm.
cry when their mom left. But when the mom came back, they would be able to be easily soothed because they trust the mom, believe that their needs would be met by the mom because she has provided this attachment where the baby is secure. And so is happy and needs are met and is trusting. And this ultimately plays a role in like what the baby would end up being like throughout life because their attachment style is pretty set to some degree when you're younger
Hmm.
and dictates things in the future. So that's the one category, the secure attached. And then the other three attachment styles are all insecure. So one is avoidant, where these babies, they're, upset when the mom leaves, but then when the mom comes back, they're kind of disengaged and act almost distant toward the mom because they don't believe that the mom would meet their needs because past experiences where the mom maybe was not really emotionally available, maybe even sometimes was punitive towards the baby in certain situations. So the baby is just not using the mom as that secure, trustworthy attachment figure. And then there's those who are ambivalent. So they're in a way kind of confused because their caregiver has shown them inconsistency, maybe sometimes is sensitive and responsive to their needs and other times kind of neglectful and not there. And so the baby feels like they can't always rely on their caregiver to meet their needs. And so they're more anxious and will, when the mom comes back, seem um like, okay, do I want you? I'm kind of not sure. Maybe I'll come, but just because they don't know that they can actually trust the mom's support. And then the last insecure attachment style is disorganized, and these babies are kind of all over the place, erratic. So when their parent comes back, they are in like a huge disarray. Um, just confused because they just don't know what their parent provides them. And so these babies are often kind of just all over the place in a nutshell. And maybe like still screaming or crying when the parent comes back, and just maybe kind of get soothed a little bit, but then might cry again. Just a mess.
Now, how do those attachment styles look in adults? Like we spoke about what an infant,
Hmm.
a toddler would probably experience or what that would look like. But now, if you took that same toddler for each of those attachment styles and added 30 years
Hmm.
to us, right,
Yeah.
our age,
Yeah.
what would
Definitely.
what would that look like? Because I think that's something that I'm sure the listeners who heard the last podcast would really want to know.
Yeah. And that's actually what I wanted us to really delve into in this podcast, because I think whether people can relate or try to identify what their attachment style is or not, and sometimes it might be hard to see it in yourself. I think we all can probably identify somebody or have known somebody in all of these different attachment
Hmm.
styles. And so, if we were to start with a secure attachment, I think that adult who was securely attached as a child is an adult who, in relationships currently, they approach it in this healthy way where if there's ever any conflict with their partner or in times of distress, because they feel secure and they feel like they can trust their partner, they are able to quickly or relatively reasonably find peace in the situation because they have an overall trust that this person is there for them. They can explore things so they don't feel like they're codependent on their partner. This is somebody who's very secure in themselves,
Hmm.
um, so has an independence about them, but feels like their partner maybe adds to them. And they view relationships as an asset, not something that they need, but not something that it's like, oh, I don't need that at all.
Hmm.
They see it as a positive thing because there's benefits and it's a healthy thing to be in. Their needs are met. And so, if you know a securely attached person, or if you believe that's you yourself, that is essentially kind of what I think it looks like. Just somebody who just, like, this only brings good things to me. And it doesn't mean it's perfection, but it means that there's good in it and I see the good in
Hmm.
it and I'm able to take from it and also be free in it. What do you think?
I would say that as much as I would want to believe I'm securely attached, I
Mm-hmm.
don't think I'm fully like there's some things that aspects I feel okay, yes, but I don't think I'm fully that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, and hopefully, if anybody who doesn't think they are securely attached can identify to some aspects of that. I mean, maybe, maybe not. Um, I don't know. I feel like I do have a secure attachment
Hmm.
style. And I think the reason why I mainly feel that way is because as an adult. Like, I think sometimes people might be able to look at these attachment styles and then say, oh, based on what I know my childhood was like or my upbringing was, I think I'm this. But I think I'm more so looking at it as based on the way I am now, I feel like I must have um, been securely attached
Hmm.
just because I do feel like generally I am a secure person. I feel secure in my relationships. I feel like I'm happy in my relationships. I don't feel like I need people and depend on them in a way of like, oh my gosh, I need this to work for me. But at the same time, I don't feel like I don't need this at all. Like I could be by myself and be just as happy. Like I do really feel the benefits. I feel like I trust those that are close to me and that I'm attached to, and that I believe that they will be there for me and meet my needs, and that if they're away, I can miss them, but not feel like, oh, I'm nothing without them. And then when they come back, I'm very happy because they are that solace for me. So overall, that's how I relate to that one.
Yeah, and I can see that, right? I think this is always a challenge because it's so nuanced to me, right? So I
Mhm.
can sit here and say that for me, and maybe if it's not even talking about the attachments necessarily, change the whole podcast, right?
Mm.
I just feel for me personally, I've always operated for as long as I can remember very independently,
Mhm.
where I try not to rely on other people. I don't want to rely on people. I don't trust putting my, what's the word? I just don't trust relying on people,
Mhm.
right? And I've always had issues with that, and we've seen how it played out before. But
Mm.
I tend to just say I rely on my abilities, right?
Mhm.
And not to say that I don't rely on other people, but I don't rely on people, if that makes sense. I just
Yeah.
kind of always have like, oh, someone's gonna let me down.
Yeah.
So my defense mechanism is just to be able to make sure that I can handle it. And I've seen that played out in negative ways too. In
Yeah.
positive ways as well, but also negative ways.
Yeah. Okay. So then I think it's safe to say that overall, even if there's some things that you can like identify with, that overall you're not securely attached, or that's not
Yeah.
your attachment
I
style.
wouldn't say I'm securely, I would like to be, right? But
Mm.
maybe for those people who aren't securely attached, it's not the end of the world. It's first identifying what you are, what the pitfalls might be, and once you identify your pitfalls, is thinking of what can I do to compensate for those pitfalls, right? Like if there is someone out there who was, and I don't think I'm disorganized, but if
Mhm.
that was your attachment style and you now know it, then you know what you're capable of doing that could be detrimental to your relationships and yourself. So now you have to counteract that, right? So I
Yeah.
guess it's one, identifying, recognizing, acknowledging, and then figuring out ways to counteract the negative impact of that style can have on your life and your relationships.
Mhm.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. So then what style do you think you do identify with the most? Because I think that's part of it too, is like seeing like what is it and maybe what you do have to address.
I think it's between the avoidant and ambivalent. And I remember taking the class in college, and I was like, I think I'm ambivalent, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Read the, if you can just quickly look it up. Read the ambivalent.
Yeah, so based on what you're saying, I actually think more avoidant for you, but
Mm.
and this quick little resource that I found, and anybody can look. Charles and I actually, as we were just looking more into the styles ourselves, we were finding that different resources kind of explain them like a little nuanced from each other,
Hmm.
but the attachment styles themselves were actually posited by this psychologist, Mary Ainsworth, and the whole research study called The Strange Situation, which involved the baby and the caregiver separation, is what this is all based on. So if you are really curious, I would recommend looking into resources that specifically explain it from Mary Ainsworth's point of view. But from what I found, the ambivalent attachment style. So this child's general state of being, how they explained it, is that this child was anxious, insecure, and angry. Okay. And it's saying that the mother's responsiveness to her child's signals and needs is inconsistent, sometimes sensitive, sometimes neglectful. And then it says the fulfillment of the child's needs, or why the child acts the way that they do, is they can't rely on their needs being met.
That does sound like me.
Yeah?
Yeah. Now again, I don't know how I was raised during those
Mm-hmm.
younger years, but I guess I just think about what I feel as an adult.
As an adult. Okay. So then what do you think about the avoidant attachment? Which, like I said, I kind of feel like I see it describes you. The child's general state of being is not very explorative, emotionally distant.
Hmm.
The mother's responsiveness to her child's signals and needs is that she's distant and disengaged. And the fulfillment of the child's needs, or why the child acts the way that they do, is that they subconsciously believe that their needs probably won't be met.
Wow. So like that that's a tough one because they're not similar, but
Right.
they're like if there's a Venn diagram between the two styles, these would definitely
They
be in there,
overlap the
right?
most.
They
Yeah.
overlap. So yeah, I think yeah, that's how I feel as an adult. And so without getting into how we grew up, which is irrelevant to this particular episode, it's more so with how we are now. How does that affect our current parenting?
Hmm.
And I don't know if you want to go first or if you want me to go first.
Yeah. Well, what I think is interesting, because I think there's two things here: your attachment style that was ingrained when you were a baby, a child, and how that impacts you as an adult. And so, how that in turn affects how you parent versus a parenting style. And parenting styles are totally different. And that might be another
Hmm.
episode where we can talk about that, because I also feel like there's parents of all these four different attachment styles that can fall into the myriad of different parenting styles, and that would all look different. But if I were to just think of it how my attachment style, which I believe is secure, impacts my parenting, I think it's interesting, because I think part of it might be because I am this secure person who believes in forming a trusting relationship and having needs met, and having your child feel like, okay, my parent is there as this stable source of me to be able to explore, but then always come back and know that they're there for me. I think I very much value that. And so I try to ensure that that happens. So even with my job, where I've had crazy, chaotic hours sometimes, where things aren't so consistent, my goal and focus a lot of times is how can I counteract those outside variables that would
Mm,
otherwise cause these issues to happen. Because I don't want parents to feel at fault if their circumstances might lend their child to developing one of these attachment styles inadvertently. And I mean that to say, Charles and I, when we were looking into these attachment styles before, we saw this example of these loving parents with their three children, and how they were awesome to their children and very responsive to their needs. And so you would have expected all of the children to be securely attached. But then one day, suddenly, the father passed away, and then the mom became less available, of course, emotionally, physically, etc. And so the impact of all of that ended up impacting the attachments of their children and definitely impacted the youngest ones the most because they were more impressionable. And so, parents, if you think, oh goodness, like I feel like my child is disorganized and I don't know how that happened. I feel like I'm a good parent. I don't want this to come across as if your child is not securely attached, you're not a good parent, you're not an
Mm,
available
good point.
parent. Yeah, and that you don't meet their needs because I think you can do your best and try your best, and for whatever reason, inconsistencies with life or whatever can impact your child's needs.
Yeah, and I guess it goes back to no one's perfect, and that the goal we believe is to be the best person you can be. If you're the
Mhm.
best person you can be, then you can be the best parent you can be. So really being intrinsic,
Mhm.
acknowledging your faults, which is really hard. Like we recently had to have a conversation, you and I, about, faults, right? And it's a big
Mhm.
pill to swallow, but you gotta take responsibility for it if you know that it's something that you need to work on, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, yes, it's attachment styles, but at the end of the day, it's, are you being the best person you can be? And I think if you're just showing love, right, for your kid, if you love your
Mhm.
kid, children, things are gonna be all right. It's not gonna be perfect, but you go a lot further than getting caught on
Mhm.
parenting styles and trying to,
Yeah.
or not parenting styles, but attachment
Then
styles. Still
yeah.
good information, right? Don't discount the
Yeah.
information, but just be mindful that you don't want to pull your hair out over this stuff either. At least I'm not going to.
Right, no. And I think that's the reason why we have these conversations. It's all about the knowledge and like being aware of it, right? Because when you're not aware of it and you just kind of are living life and you don't take that second to be like, oh goodness, yeah, that's a good point. Like, what things are happening that are impacting maybe the way my child is forming their attachment that is going to ultimately impact them in their adult relationships? Just even having that little awareness,
Hmm.
just the fact that you listened to this conversation today and you heard what we're saying
Hmm.
may make you think, oh, like maybe I should do a little bit more of this or ensure that there's a little bit less of that. Um, just to kind of support them in being a little bit more secure.
Yeah. Yeah. I think for me, though, is because in many ways, sometimes I don't feel secure or I didn't feel secure. I am trying to compensate for that in our
Mm,
daughters, right? So I think for me, I'm very big on just spending time with the girls. And one thing that I try to do is, if time allows, I really try to do this, is in the mornings before I start work, I do spend time with Leilani before Nai wakes up. I'll
mhm,
read a book, I'll play, be really intentional, and then obviously I try to do the same with Anaya when I'm getting her ready as Layla's getting her play on downstairs.
mhm,
And even at the end of the day, I try to spend time with both of them. I really believe that my goal in life is to be a good husband, but also to be a really good dad, where my daughters will look back on their childhood and be like, he was there. He made me feel comforted. And one thing I'm doing, I think I spoke about this last episode, is I try to my best to validate their feelings,
mhm,
and I try my best to um, be engaged. I can do better, right? There's times
mhm.
where I'm like in my own head when I'm overwhelmed or trying to get dishes done, but I do try my best to, dance with them, play with them, just make them feel like it's not just, okay, I'm home, eat,
Yeah,
bath,
yeah.
read, pray, go to bed. It's like, okay, we're going to get down. And hopefully one of these times I'll be able to share some video footage with y'all. I'm big on, recording our interactions with our daughters
Mhm.
because I just really believe in them being able to see that later on in life. But I try my best to make good memories with
Yeah,
them as a family, but also with me and them individually. So
yeah.
yeah, I just want them to feel heard, feel loved, regardless of how busy our schedules are. I try to let them know that we are there,
Yeah.
even though we're not always there,
Exactly.
right?
And that's something we mentioned too last time is just like trying to maintain as much consistency as possible. So even if your schedule is not consistent, even if life throws its curveballs where you can only be but so consistent in general, if you are consistently mindful about being there for them, showing them that you're there for them, like having the preciousness of those moments and making all those moments count, even if it's just an hour a day before they go to bed, because that's all you have because of the busyness of your schedule. Consistently, like devoting your whole self to them in that hour. Because I think that goes a longer way than anything else. Your child will feel that
Hmm.
like, yeah, there's times where my mom isn't there. Like for me, I mean, there were really literally 28 hours straight where I'd be at work. I would not be at home. But when I am home, it's trying to like totally delve into
Yeah.
them so that they know that like even if my mom hasn't been here for a while, when she's here and she shows me she's here.
Yeah, and I think either you told me about this or I read it somewhere or a friend told me it's like you can be there but not be there,
Mhm.
right? So, and I was falling into this trap
Mhm.
very early on being a dad, just being around,
Mhm.
just doing the bare minimum. And I thought I was doing something, right? I'm like, I'm
Yeah.
doing this, I'm changing the diaper, I'm here. But it wasn't until I actually had to begin to be on my own because you were starting residency, but also really it's when Anaya got her diagnosis too, right?
Mhm.
It just changed your perspective on life
Yeah.
and moments and made you reflect on your what your role is because this is a person Anaya is a person that really thrive will have to thrive off of will thrive if we give her our all and then some, right?
Mhm.
Because she requires more than,
Mhm.
let's say, Leilani. And so I found myself with this whole diagnosis realizing that I needed to give more of me than I
Mhm.
was in the past
Mhm.
and not just do the kind of check off the box. I was there, I took you to therapies. It was just like this wave of realization that intentionality is one of the utmost of the utmost importance
Yeah.
with your kids, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah.
And so that's what I would leave the listeners with is realize that the moments you create for your children will transcend every fault that you have, right? I mean, not every fault, but
Mhm.
um, don't get caught into this whole like woe is me. I don't have this. I did this. It's more so what am I going to do to make my child feel loved,
Insecure.
secure, happy? And sometimes the answer is you have to sacrifice. I'm not talking about money.
Mhm.
I'm talking about time, which is not really a sacrifice, but time, energy,
Mhm.
right? That's what, yeah, that's what I want to kind of leave them with,
Yeah.
at least on my end, is that just being intentional about giving love to your kid, spending quality time, and creating those moments.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would of course echo that and just emphasis on what you're doing now when your child is really young is forming the basis of how they view relationships and bonds, how they view interactions with those closest to them. And so it truly is an evolutionary thing of like forming attachments and that dictating like how we can expect relationships to move forward for us in the future. And so if your child feels at the very beginning, oh, if there's somebody that's there for me that I trust and they provide me all these things, I can believe that in the future. And it changes the way they view themselves, the way they view the world. And so, again, thinking about all this as the building block and doesn't mean, oh no, it's too late. I messed my child up. If now they're 12 years old and I realize they might be avoidant, but it's being aware of whatever it is and how to navigate and even how to equip your child with the tools to navigate or change expectations. And that's a whole new conversation. But again, we want people to just have that awareness generally because when you are ignorant to these things, you really can't do anything about it. And we want us all to reach our utmost potential. And part one is like being your best, the best you can be, and equipping your children to be the best they can be. So hopefully, this conversation kind of just sparks something in you to just, if you have really, really little ones and you feel like you can make changes now to help them form a more solid and secure foundation, think about ways to do that now. And if they're a little older, or even in yourself, if you feel like there's things you can do to just better cope with this world, hey, like look into things you can do, like figure out like what might be those triggers or those things that make things difficult for you in relationships and try to address those.
That's our challenge, really, right?
Yeah.
It's the attachment styles. It's a helpful tool to at least give you a foundational understanding of why you are who you are and what you can do to, like you said, counteract it, but
Mhm.
also what your kids could potentially experience one of those for.
Mhm.
So choosing which one you want for them and seeking help, guidance on how you can create that particular attachment style for your child or children. That's the
Mm,
challenge,
yeah.
part two, right?
Yeah, and
Um,
this has definitely stemmed a lot of thoughts, and I feel like we need to talk about parenting styles at some point now.
yeah, I think that might be good for another episode.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, hopefully this was good. It's a good conversation. I know that it's we were kind of dabbling around and not
Mhm.
going into depth, for good reason. But we hope you got the challenge, the call to action from this particular episode. And always appreciate you all listening and subscribing and sharing this with any parents
Mhm.
grandparents, soon to be parents, soon to be grandparents,
And if you have
aunties.
any other questions or comments on this topic, we would love to hear any thoughts, insights in our comments, or reach out to us if you know us, because I feel like this conversation could keep going on and on.
Yeah, so appreciate you, Monet, for bringing this topic up.
Yes, appreciate you, Charles, for going back to those human bonding days
I know.
and discussing.
I got that 96% on that final though, so
It
comeback good.
showed.
All right. Well, until next time, everyone. We love you. We appreciate you, and we hope you took some good stuff from this, some good meat from this particular conversation, this episode. Until next time, peace.
Love ya.